So there is a lot going on with cellulose. A lot. I mean, it's like the fundamental backbone of all biomass. And if you get a chance, I encourage you to watch the YouTube lecture that I gave in Billings last week. That's why I wasn't here last week. I was talking to the National Center for Appropriate Technology. I was giving a lecture through the Harvesting Clean Energy Conference. And let me just pop into it really quick. So I've got this really old page. There's a bunch of broken links in here, but I use it as my own set of personal bookmarks. And if you look, this is my talk. I don't know how popular it is. I was going over this with my daughter. She's like, Dad, no one's going to listen to that because it's too boring.
The future, one of those young leaders in the energy industry to step up. So Dr. Bradley Logan directs the Energy Technology Program at Missouri College, where he and his students investigate solutions.
There were some really good MCs there. There was some of the reporters from the Western agricultural community were there. But let me pop out. This is the paper that I spent a lot of time on. It's Schramsky, 2015. These folks are at University of Georgia, and they really talk about the overall picture of the world's biomass reserves. And when it gets right down to it, the majority of those biomass reserves are cellulose. And I'll just pop the slides up right now. So again, that's where the YouTube video is. I will kill that for the time being, but let me just show you briefly what that paper is about and what I gave in my talk. So here's documents, here's conferences, 2015. This was NCAT in Billings. This is my talk, and I'm just going to hop through it pretty quickly here. I went through all of this very quickly. You guys have heard a lot of this already from my previous talks. But what Schramsky talks about is the fact that humankind is more or less a drain on this chemical battery that the Earth has. The chemical battery are the oil, gas, and coal reserves. Coal being the primary one that's relevant to cellulose. Also talks a little, and we'll talk about this a little more in 102 this afternoon. We talked about the 500 exajoules that humanity uses. He's looking at 19 zetajoules as the amount of energy that turns from photons into biomass. What is biomass? Well, I don't know. I actually have a can of it right here. This is my own little compost can that I've been carrying around. Right in there, I mean, you can see just some tissue paper, right? So this is stuff that normally gets thrown away in the bathroom. There's also a little chunk of, what is that? Just a rind of a piece of cabbage that was sort of, I didn't want to eat. So there's cellulose in the paper, there's cellulose in this food, there's really, really old cellulose in coal. The point of the Schramsky paper is that we are eating through this stuff at a rate that is extraordinarily unsustainable. If you look at that curve, that's more or less how much biomass there is on the planet, the stores underground, and that downward spiral is more or less the rate at which it's running out. And if we were to do some modeling, like we did in 101 and 102, I mean, you would model that with an exponential curve that just tanks like tomorrow. I compared this is our current usage of global energy, the majority of which is biomass. This is our annual budget. This is what the Earth's biosphere turns into usable biomass. We are converting the equivalent of 1/4 of it every year into heat, into CO2. Back to Shramsky, here's his equation. I encourage you to read this paper. This is also looking at, going back to year 0, at our then rate of consumption, we had 65,000 years of biomass left. You come along, and at our rate of consumption, of course, the total number of years left in the bank goes down. This, for better or worse, is the plague. Our consumption rate obviously went down because nearly a third of the world's population died. Zooming in, so this is obviously in tens of thousands of years. If we zoom in closer on the graph, now we're into the hundreds of years. We're at year 2000. You can see this curve is actually curving in the right direction. And after giving my keynote in the wake of Lillian Salerno, who's the undersecretary at the USDA, we basically decided this really is the curve that needs to be turned around. USDA represents more or less how we artificially enhance the biomass reserves, the cellulosic reserves, the phytomass reserves of the planet. So the whole point that I'm trying to make here is we need to turn this curve around, or we will very quickly run out of this precious reserve. I also made some arguments of leaving a lot of the coal and oil in the ground too, because it's obviously a very valuable commodity, and burning through it at the rate that we are, we won't leave it for future generations. Okay. A little bit more on cellulose, and then we're going to go back to the bullpen. We got about a half hour left in class. Okay, let me just take you to one other paper that I wrote a few years ago, and this has relevance here. So let's go to 2010. I wrote this with a colleague of mine. And what we were looking at is how a certain protein in a fern allows that fern to actually not die. So let me dive right into not die when it's experiencing extreme drought. So here's an example of a cellulosic material, a plant, and we know that cellulose is one of the structural components of plants in addition to lignin and pectin and whatnot. Here's what happens when it gets really dry. As it turns out, you can actually water this thing and it comes back to life. Sometimes it's called the resurrection fern. Right down in the nitty-gritty, though, if you slice this apart, all of these cell walls are little cellulosic materials. So a little bit like that edible water bottle we saw a second ago. There's really no caloric value in the cellulose. Our bodies do not have an enzyme to digest it. We do have enzymes to digest starches, but this is what the plant relies on for its structure. Digging down further, what we were able to find are specific proteins in this plant that when the amount of water available diminishes, this protein is expressed. What's in this protein? Well, there's a amino acid called lysine, which has a positive charge. As you know, water itself is polar. The lysine pulls the water in, and what we hypothesized is that extra water would be found in the cell walls. So this is another cross section, and you can see right around the cell walls that protein looks like it's being expressed during drought. Why would you want water in the cell walls of a plant while it's sort of drying and crinkling and shriveling up? Well, you'd want that so that more or less as a lubricant. So as those layers are sort of crinkling and moving back and forth, one of two things is going to happen when you crinkle a sheet of paper. You do this enough times to a material, eventually it's going to crack. But if you have a lubricant in there, it could do it numerous times and not fracture. So what we found is that in plants like corn, they don't have this protein. They will compress, they will shrink, they will sort of implode, and as that's happening, they'll fracture. And if a cell fractures, the contents of that cell leak out and it dies, and it leads to the entire organism dying. So another example of how we're sort of looking right down at the nanoscale of cellulosic materials to look how plants themselves can survive drought. Okay, so that's a very quick run through on some really big ideas on cellulose. Just while we're at it, let's just take another little look at the structure of cellulose. And it's pretty simple. It's just a bunch of glucoses stuck together. So let's grab a little image here. Kind of fun. So in a week or two, we're going to cover polystyrene. The weird thing about cellulose and polystyrene, they look a lot alike. They've got this sort of carbon-based ring. The only difference, there's this little oxygen sort of kicking around. So the reds are oxygen, the whites are hydrogen, but it's this pretty neat looking structure. It's a hydrocarbon. It's carbon, oxygen, and hydrogens. But the very remarkable thing about this, in my mind, is that nature manufactures this material at ambient temperature. There's no sort of big heat signature involved in the manufacturing of it, as we see in the manufacturing of plastics. Taking very ancient hydrocarbons, and so really you look at this structure, and coal is just really old compressed cellulose. So that kind of takes us back full circle to that Shramsky, and realizes that all of those bonds, every one of those carbon bonds we're seeing on the page there, were put there by some photon hitting photosystem 1 tens of millions of years ago. And anyway, it's there for us to be used either as a present resource or a past resource. And really the couple points I'm trying to make here is that we should really focus on preserving both of them to a much greater extent and putting them to use, rather than jamming this stuff into the landfill where it just becomes anaerobic and turns into methane. This should be turned back into soil that we use to make the next generation of plants. So, okay. Any other questions on cellulose? Sort of what it is, where it comes from, what it does. I mean, it serves us in numerous ways, and I think it's critical that we put it to better use. Questions at all? So I think I covered the embodied question that Ryman Schneider had. I hope everyone followed along with that. I caught up on the forum. There were some current concerns that we're not, maybe we all can't be in one place at one time for some hands-on. I've got Andrew McChain showing up, our own local battery doctor. He's also got two companies. One's called My Solar Chest, and he's even got another one called My Solar Cart. He's built a solar-powered golf cart with a sweet little set of PV panels on top and a giant array of batteries inside. He's actually going to come and grab what's left of our 2012 solar car and repurpose it as well. So, okay, so just to recap, this week we've covered glass. This week is cellulosic material. I will fill in a little forum here by the end of the day. Tim Chester and I are driving to Browning on Friday to install a solar thermal heat exchanger on someone's house there as part of our NSF grant. I will do my best, again, while I'm in Browning, to post lectures just like I did last week on glass recycling. So check those out, log into the forum, and we'll see you next week, unless there's any other questions on cellulose. But we talked a little bit about the fact that it's it's wood, and that it will turn back into dirt eventually, and I think it's really up to us to turn it, back into valuable soil that we can use for the next round of food. Okay, good.